Well, good evening, everybody, and welcome to the 2021 Master Gardener program. Tonight's program is on soil amendments or gardening organically. And actually, the whole Master Gardener program takes a very holistic, synergistic look at gardening from trees to shrubs to vegetable gardens. And so we always try to do things with the least toxic, the most friendly methods of gardening possible. And I still have people joining, so we'll get going here. So I'm going to share my screen and beat off my coworker here. This coworker. And if you have questions, we all should be veterans of chat or Zoom by now. And down in the chat box, go ahead and put in a question if you want. You can raise your hand. You can interrupt me. So it's pretty, I want this to be very interactive, very user-friendly. And if you ask a question, I'm sure other people are thinking the same question. So don't feel like you can't ask a question. So by all means, go ahead, either raise your hand on Zoom or interrupt me. So I'm good with that. And with that, I'm going to share my screen. So it's going to kind of go blank for a minute here, and I'm going to pick up the lecture. We still have quite a few people trying to join us. That's all right. That's great. I also invited the graduated Master Gardeners to the Zoom program. So there's people with some experience here. Right. Okay, can everybody sees what I'm seeing? They can see the screen? Okay. Okay, again, so this program is all about growing vegetables, growing, hang on, I have a little too much help here. Okay. So again, this is all about trying to amend the soil in a manner that we feed the soil microorganisms. When we talked about that on Monday night's class. So it's all about feeding the soil so that the soil can feed the plant. And that's just it's a lot more holistic, organic method. Instead of force feeding the plant itself, you're getting the soil to do your work for you. And so it's a slow release of nutrients over the season instead of one big shot all at once. So again, kind of to recap, we've got 90 to 140 growing days per season. I've actually got to experience less. Had one year where it was 88 growing days. So that's a very short season. It's hard to get a lot of stuff done. Cool nights. That's kind of the hallmark of growing in Wyoming, is the cool nights, and that slows that plant growth down a whole lot. But every 10 years we go into a severe drought, and we're there. We're at that 10-year mark. And our average highs typically, last year was kind of an exception to that, but we never get really hot either during the day, and of course at night we get pretty cool. And then watering your plants. This is so important. You need to water deeply, so a lot of water infrequently. And being consistent is really important, especially for your vegetables and your trees, is that deep watering instead of short little sips. Deep water is much better. And then soil. So soil again, so this again is a little bit of a review from what we went through on Monday. Air, water, decaying plant residuals, also known as organic material, minerals, salt, or mineral sand, silt, and clay. So increasing organic matter typically improves the soil health. Just depends upon with what you're using to use as your organic material. Healthy soils are porous, allows air and water to move through there, so that air actually is really quite important. And a balance ensures a suitable habitat for soil organisms that support growing plants. So these microorganisms are really kind of what we're targeting. Again, soil is a vital resource. This is something that the Soil Health Institute here, this group, they put out a weekly, I believe it's weekly, email, and then they host some conferences. I was supposed to go to one 2020. It's been rescheduled for March of this year. I'm not sure it's going to happen, but it's a pretty interesting group, and they are doing a lot of research. They're funding a lot of research on soil health and vitality and trying to hold that soil. You know, what does it take to keep that soil in place and build it back up instead of with all the erosion that we're dealing with. So soil basics. You only want to work the soil when it's dry. And so this is one of the big conundrums in the spring. So come March, you know, it's starting to warm up. You know, you're thinking, gosh, I could get some stuff into the ground and I could get some things planted. But if the soil is wet, if you work that soil when it's wet, you will compact it. You'll cause compaction. And once you start causing compaction, it's really hard to reverse that. And the other thing when you work the soil when it's wet is you will have a net loss of organic material. So you really want to only work the soil when it's dry. And then every time you work the soil, you want to start adding organic material back into that. And so we're going to talk tonight about what that organic material is. And okay, so the question was, will you please explain why not to use manure on clay prairie soils? I will get to my soapbox on that one shortly. So healthy soil is going to give you a healthy plant. And a healthy plant's one that's not going to have, that's going to be able to fend off insects and bacteria and fungal problems. So I did talk a little bit about soil salt in the soil. And soil salinity is a measurement of electric conductivity. And so when you see it on the soil report, it's EC, which stands for electric conductivity. So how does working wet soil cause a net loss of organic material? Because you're starting to add air back into that, but you're not necessarily adding more organic material. And so that damp and that air, so wet and air, is going to cause that net loss of organic material. The two work against each other on that. Okay, so soil salinity, again, this is something that is kind of hard to wrap your head around, but is so important because it can really make or break your soils. And there are some things that if you add to your soil will cause a rise in the soil salinity or the salt in your soil. When you have a soil test done, this is one of the things that they measure for the electric conductivity, because you can run a current through salt. And so they measure that current. And so a soil that's non-saline is going to be 2 or less, very slightly saline, 4. slightly saline 4 to 8, and moderately saline 8 to 16. At 8 to 16, you're not going to get much of anything to grow in it. Think of the red desert here in Wyoming. Slightly saline. Natrona County fights this one a lot. Very slightly saline. You can still do a vegetable garden in here, but you're going to have problems, and you're also going to start to see problems with some of your trees. Okay. So fertilizers all have a salt index. So they all have a measurement of what that salt is. And so sodium nitrate, and by the way, these are things that you can all buy, and a lot of times farmers use a lot of this stuff, but they spread it over a wide area, so it's not going to hurt the farm fields. But if you use this stuff in a small area like your vegetable garden or your lawn, you're going to start to have problems with it. But sodium nitrate its index is 100, so that's our benchmark fertilizer. Then ammonium sulfate. And ammonium sulfate is one of these kind of sneaky ones because it lowers the pH. The ammonium sulfate will lower your pH, but it'll raise the salt level. They don't know why. They don't know why that happens, but a lower pH and a high salt, you're not going to have as many problems, and you can leach that salt out a little bit easier. But what you don't want to get into a situation is where you have a high pH and a high salt level and have what's called a sodium absorption ratio that you can't counter. And so that's when you start having to do raised beds and get real creative with your gardening. The area up around Gillette, there's areas over by Rosette that has that high salt and a high pH. It makes it very difficult to grow much. And so it just kind of goes down the list. And then on the very bottom, you've got potassium, magnesium, sulfur, potassium, and magnesium. And those are both mined in Colorado. And those actually help out the vegetable garden, especially the sulfur, potassium, magnesium. Tomatoes, potatoes, oh, they love that stuff. But just know that with your fertilizers, all fertilizers, unless you're making your own, are going to be a salt. And they all have a salt index. And depending upon what they are and how you use them, they can hurt the soil. Sometimes they help the soil, but too much of a good thing, again, of course, is going to hurt the soil. So keep this in mind. Again, some do's and don'ts. My husband loves to rototill, and I'm not really sure why, but he gets into like recreational rototilling, and it becomes a sport. And more is never enough. And you know, 1 or 2 laps is all you need. Normally, what I'll do is I'll start layering what I'm going to add to the soil, my organic materials, and then I'll rototill all that in all at once. And my husband gets to do 2 laps, and then he has to stop. So intense physical tillage disrupts the soil, releases a lot of carbon, increases aeration. That increased aeration, you know, some air movement is of course needed, but that excessive aeration, again, accelerates the decomposition of your crop residues, and you have, again, a net loss of organic material because it's just decomposing so much faster. Okay. So for all of you who've been back east or grew up down south or someplace in between, back east, it's not unusual to have to lime the soil to raise the pH. But here in Wyoming, we already have a very high pH soil. And so we don't want to ever raise that pH. We want to always try to lower it. And again, only vegetable gardeners are crazy enough to try to lower the soil pH because that's what vegetables want. They want a more acidic soil than a more alkaline soil. So you never want to lime your soil. And I see the big box garden soil try to sell lime. If you've got horses and you've got horse stalls, by all means use lime in the horse stall, but you never want to put it on your garden or your lawn, your vegetable garden. And then of course the myth, the gardening myth, the urban myth is that needles from pine trees cause the soil underneath the pine tree to become acidic, and that's why things don't grow under them. It is a myth, 100% myth. And it would take poundage, hundreds of pounds of pine needles and probably as many years for that soil underneath there to become acidic. And so liming the soil underneath a pine tree just hurts the pine tree. It causes them problems because now you've raised the soil pH, and so now they can't get the nutrients, because that pH is what regulates how nutrients become available to a plant. More acidic releases some of the nutrients, a little more alkaline releases. More alkaline can also tie up a lot of nutrients. In our case here in Wyoming, it ties up a lot of the nutrients. So raising the pH is really counterindicated in Wyoming and in the West in general, because our soils are already pretty high in calcium or high in lime. And so it's, as a rule, not needed. So back to the pine tree, why does stuff not want to grow underneath a pine tree? It's too shady. It's just flat out too shady, but you never want to limb your pine tree up either. And today is a good example of why you don't want to limb that tree up. Okay, lawn fertilizers in your vegetable garden. Oh, let me back up to wood ash, fireplace ash, and barbecue ash. Okay, so way back in the day, way back in the pioneer day, I guess, wood ash and fireplace ash, Grandma would decant water through the wood ash to get lye. And she used the lye to make soap. Well, lye has got a pH of like 14. It just doesn't get any higher than lye. And so all of these just add to that increased soil pH. A little wood ash goes a long ways. And by all means, if you want to use a little bit, that little bit goes, again, a long, long ways. And a lot of micronutrients in it. But again, a little goes a long ways. And then lawn fertilizer in your vegetable garden. You know, there's no guarantee that when they stop doing weed and feed fertilizer, you know, a lawn fertilizer with herbicide in it, that they actually clean the hopper and that it's a clean fertilizer and it's just what it says on the bag. You can't bank on that one. And so there's the risk of an herbicide being in a lawn fertilizer, even if it's just a straight fertilizer. Okay, manures. So here's my soapbox, and I think it's in here one more time. Even manures that have been composted are still at risk for things like E. coli and salmonella and listeria, campylobacter. It just depends upon what your manure source is. And in horse manure, I see ads in traders every spring where it's like, you know, we have manure for your garden, come get it, it's free, we'll load. Well, horse manure, horses are horrible processors of food, and they don't process any of the weed seeds, they just kind of get encapsulated in a little package of fertilizer. And horse manure, you're going to be fighting weeds forever because of the horse manure. And then manures from cattle. So I raise cattle and I raise sheep, and I always have salt blocks available to them and mineral blocks. And so what their body doesn't use with the salts, it just comes out the back side. And so the manures are always going to be on the salty side. And if they've had any sort of antibiotics or wormers, especially with your horses, wormers with horses, that doesn't all get absorbed by that animal, and so it just comes out the back end. And so now you're potentially adding wormer, antibiotics, definitely adding a lot of salts to your soil. And, you know, when we put it in a pile and it sits there and then it rains and snows on it, everything just soaks down to the bottom. And when I put my tractor bucket there, I pick up from the bottom. Well, the bottom is where it's the most salty. That's where all that salt is accumulated. And so unless it gets turned and mixed around, it's going to be pretty toxic at that bottom. And chicken manure, there's your Campylobacter. And so I'm just not a big fan of using manures. And I've been gardening forever, and I don't put manure in my vegetable gardens ever. There's so many other ways to do this, and your risk of, especially with your cow or dairy cow manure with E. coli, and here in Wyoming, those pathogens don't break down. They can hang out for a year and still be viable in that manure. Do you use manure in orchards or hedgerows? I've flung manure out on the prairie, and again, I just always worry about the salts, especially with trees and in hedgerows. I just kind of concerned about too much in there. But you can definitely, you know, if you spread it out thin enough, that's fine. The problem I run into is a lot of people in vegetable gardens like to just go to the store and buy all sorts of manure in a bag, and more is better, and then they just destroy and make that vegetable garden toxic. And so that's where you run into a lot of problems, is that stuff can be very toxic. And as far as the NPK goes, nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium, the manures are very low in those. They're not very high in anything. And so when they refer to them as hots, they're hot because of the salts in them. And of course, then there's turkey and chicken pellets. And those have been pasteurized and then processed down, and read the ingredients on the back, on the label, and see exactly what the NPK is. They're never going to tell you what the salts are or the pH, but just always keep in mind that there's the potential for them being high in salts. And so, too much salt in your garden causes a physiological drought of the plant. And so that means that there's so much salt in there that it's pulling the water away from the roots, and that the plant wilts or turns yellow. The lower leaves turn yellow, and you water it and it kind of perks back. Next day it's wilty, you water it, perks up, and this goes back and forth. The wilt, the water, the wilts, and eventually the plant just dies. Well, that's physiological drought of the plant caused by salts in the soil. And I know Brian's going to talk more about this, and I'll cover it a couple more times throughout the program. So organic matter, and we're going to talk about exactly what else that can mean, but it improves the buffering capacity of the soil. Okay, so those salts can never be flushed out. Yes and no. Yes and no. So the salts, that's lots and lots of water to push it down below the root zone. That salt has got to go someplace. We don't know where that is exactly going to be. It could be over to your neighbor's yard. It could be to your backyard. It could be down to your trees. So you don't exactly know where you're pushing all that salt out. If you don't push it deep enough, the next time that area gets watered, their capillary action will pull the salt back to the surface. And so trying to remediate salty soils is incredibly difficult. That's there's some plants that work with that, but most of the time it's water and time. So organic matter, and again, we're going to talk a little bit more about exactly what organic matter is and how you can improve it in your soils. But it improves the buffering capacity of soil, so it keeps soil from overreacting. So if you've added too much fertilizer or too much of something, that organic matter is going to buffer that, kind of like an antacid. And organic matter is going to support the soil's microbiology activity. So it's going to help increase that. And again, those microorganisms are very important to plant health. And it also breaks down slowly, so it's a slow release NPK, and it contributes nutrients back that are both minor and major. So your major ones are your NPK, nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium, and then the minor ones are 14 other ones, kind of like a vitamin. So organic matter benefits: improves your tilth, and tilth is the soil's ability to grow healthy crops. And it's your ability to work that soil and not damage it, and it has the right structure, and it's got nutrients in it. So organic matter also improves the condition of the soil, the structure of the soil, and really, really importantly, the water and nutrient holding capacity of that soil. So organic matter, again, acids arriving from the decomposition of the organic matter help to convert insoluble natural additives into plant usable form. So you've added, you did the alfalfa tea, you poured that on your plants around the roots. And so that organic material is going to help break some of that back down and help hand it off to the plant. Again, slow release, that's what you want. You don't want the real quick hit of nutrients. That quick hit of nutrients is what brings in the insects. Helps vegetables, helps trees, your lawn, shrubs. Everybody survives stress is from plant pests, heat, drought, wind, snow, cold. It really helps plants survive a lot better and helps them deal with the stress. So organic matter should provide adequate ground cover to protect against soil erosion. It should help hold that soil together. Have a high rate of nitrogen fixation and good biomass production. So it's again, we're talking about holding that soil together so that it doesn't blow away, especially in today's windstorm. I've watched a few places lose quite a bit of soil today. So it takes a lot of organic material to raise the garden soil by organic material by 1%, 460 pounds for 1,000 square foot vegetable or garden to raise the soil by 1%. That's a lot. That's a lot of stuff. It's doable, but it just takes some time. So again, we've already talked a little bit about soil pH. And again, it's the measurement of alkalinity or acidity on a scale of 1 to 14. And on that pH scale, 7 is neutral. And our soils here are kind of right there at neutral to a little bit alkaline. So I see it at 7, 7.5, 8, 8.5. And when you start getting numbers smaller, that's where you start getting acidic soils. And those acidic soils are what's found back east. And alkaline soils are found out here in the west. And it has a lot to do with how much water, how much natural rain we get. Back east, they get a lot more rain. And up in the Pacific Northwest, they get a lot more rain, so their soils are acidic. And it's that rain that pushes down to below the root zone the salts and things that like to raise that soil pH. And so that's why this is being pushed the way it is in the regions. And so an example of other things that are pH, lye. up there, 13 to 14. Ammonia, 11. Baking soda, 8.5. Milk is slightly acidic at 6.6. Wine, 4.0. And lemon juice at 2, a pH of 2. Give you an idea of your pH. You can use vinegar, which has got a pH of 4.5 to 5.5, to help acidify water when you are watering everything from house plants to trees to your vegetable garden, depending upon what you're starting to see going on with that tree, that plant. So soil microorganisms, and I keep talking about these guys. A lot of research done on this. Almost every university, land-grant university, has done some research at some level on soil microorganisms. And so it's pretty crowded down there. And these numbers just always amaze me. But it's been estimated that 1 teaspoon of soil, of good quality soil, I'll quantify that, contains 50 nematodes. And nematodes are microscopic, think of them as like microscopic worms. 62,000 algae, 72,000 protozoa, over 100,000 fungi, 2.9 acidomycetes, 25.8 million bacteria. So there's a lot of stuff going on in that soil, and all of these work for the benefit of breaking down nutrients and handing them back to the plant, especially the fungi and the bacteria. So soil microorganisms, transformation of organic material. These are the guys that break everything down. They hand all that stuff off to the plant. And almost every chemical transformation taking place in the soil involves soil microorganisms. If they're not there, everything just sits there and doesn't do anything. A lot of times your in-town lawns that have been sprayed, with the chem lawn, green lawn, all those people, and just fed a quick release fertilizer, I have almost very little soil microorganisms left, because they just can't live in a hostile environment where it's just constant, the wrong type of fertilizer. So the question is, so if nematodes are good, how can you keep them off potatoes and still have them in the dirt? So there are good nematodes and bad nematodes. And unfortunately, they don't wear little white hats or little black hats so that we can tell the difference. And there's also nematodes. There's a nematode that likes to go after carrots. And there are nematodes on potatoes. That's the potato farmers just go crazy with that. That's devastating for potato farmers. So you can actually buy good nematodes to go after your bad nematodes. And I know that sounds really strange, but we're within the horticulture agronomy industry, they're reaching more and more for biological controls and trying to get good bugs to fight the bad bugs and use less chemicals. And to Debbie, yes, I don't know if I'd spray it. I'm not a lawn person, and I'd probably just throw the alfalfa pellets on the lawn and water them in, call it good. I'm not your lawn person. Well, when Chris Hilgert comes, he's the lawn guy. I'm your vegetable garden person. Okay. So again, Soil microorganisms help hold everything together. They help reduce soil erosion. They help water holding capacity. They just help. They help with that soil, and again, they help hold things together. Okay, soil bacteria, enzymatic transformers, oxidizers, or reducers. So they again help break things down, used for salt remediation, break down the petroleum-based products in the soil. So I guess if you have over fertilized your garden with too much manures, you can always try to go for a soil bacteria to do this with. And then the one that's the most commonly used, especially in vegetable gardens, is your Rhizobium. And we'll talk about this at length with the vegetable class, but you inoculate your green beans and your peas, any of your legumes with a Rhizobium. And that way, when they put down their roots, they're able to assimilate nitrogen efficiently. Without that, they don't pull up the nitrogen, and they are very poor producers. Their leaves kind of are yellowish, greenish yellow, and they don't produce as well as if you had inoculated that seed with the Rhizobium. Okay, fungi. We all know how well fungus can break things down. Trees are a really good example of that. Horseshoe fungus, bracket fungus. They're definitely the workhorse. They help hold everything together. And of course, a good example of fungus is, especially in your lawn, are the little mushrooms that pop up. And so here's my caveat of to lawn fungus, lawn mushrooms is let your lawn grow longer. Don't mow it as short, and don't back off on the fertilizer, and put down some Revive. Revive is a surfactant, and it helps that water penetrate, break through that surface tension barrier, and it helps the water penetrate into the soil more efficiently, because fungus, especially your fairy ring fungus, can actually be hydrophobic and repel water, and that's why a lot of times you'll have dead spots. So using Revive helps mitigate that. Okay, if you're seeing lawn mushrooms, it's because there's something in your lawn, in the soil, that's decomposing. And fungus will decompose just about anything and release the nutrients back to the plant, back to the soil. So they're hardworking. And again, there's a whole gardening kind of culture around hugel culture, where they'll bury a log and plant on top of the log. And again, it's buried about a foot deep into the soil and is covered with good soil, watered. And as it breaks down with the fungi, then it puts nutrients back into the soil. We got hugel culture going at Saratoga Community Garden. So every once in a while, I check that out, see how that's doing. Microcarrhizia. This is really the one that you want, especially with your trees. And for a while, there was a nursery in town that was selling little containers of microcarrhizia that you could mix in with your soil when you planted a new tree. And they went out of business. I managed to have them donate all their little containers of microcarrhizia. So I gave them, so one year all the students got a container of this stuff with a caveat of, see what you can see if this actually works and does what it's supposed to. So I mixed it in with my potting soil, my seed starting soil, and I had much better seed starting and a much healthier little plant. So it works. It worked for the application I was using it in. Okay. Microcarrhizia cannot survive long in bare soil conditions. So soil that's been compacted, it's been over fertilized with your commercial fertilizers, And soil that doesn't have a lot of organic material in it, the microcarycia is not going to survive in it. And it's pretty much a blanket comment for all of the soil microorganisms. They're just not going to survive in soil that's lacking in organic material. Okay, so green plow down plants. What is that? So a green, that's kind of like your cover crops or your green manure, where you grow a sacrificial crop and then you plow it down and you incorporate it back into the soil. And for soils that really need to have some organic matter added back to them, this is probably one of the safest and most efficient and most rewarding way to increase the soil organic material is with a plow down. So you grow something like oats or wheat, you don't let it go to seed, you plow it, you rototill it under, or you get out there with your shovel and dig it under and flip it over. And you can increase the soil organic matter very, very quickly and the soil tilth really fast using this. Okay. So if the soils are degraded, we're added a quality compost. And so we're going to talk about that throughout the program, and we'll kind of define it a little bit better. And okay, so what time is it? I've got 1:45. I just want to be really mindful of giving you guys breaks. So I'm going to stop sharing briefly. And we can pick on Steve Johnson later. There'll be a quiz later for Steve. Yeah, and unfortunately, when I'm sharing my screen, I can't see everybody like I can right now, and so I can't do a quick glance very fast or very quickly. Okay, so back to the lecture, and we'll take a break in about 10 minutes. I'm going to share the screen again. Okay. So I'll try not to put you guys to sleep. So again, we talked a little bit about nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium, NPK on the first night. And again, those are your major plant nutrients. And when you buy a fertilizer, that's going to be on that bag or box of fertilizer. And sometimes they're a little sneaky about it. And they're going to say, you know, this will make your petunias grow big and lush and huge, or, you know, you'll have the biggest tomatoes on the block. You really need to find out how much nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium is actually in there. And the other important thing is that it should have micronutrients in that. And those micronutrients are just as important: the calcium, magnesium, iron, boron, manganese, and sulfur. Sulfur especially, all very important. And they're not needed in as big of a quantity as NPK, but they are needed in a little bit smaller amounts. Sulfur actually, you could put in as much sulfur as you do sometimes nitrogen. And so this one is really kind of critical in the western soils. I'm on a very sandy loam soil, and sandy loam soils are usually deficient in sulfur. And so that's one that every time I garden, every time I do anything, I'm putting sulfur in there. And okay, so nitrogen, necessary for many functions, including growth, fruit bud formation, fruit set, and fruit size. Nitrogen is a little persnickety. Too high of a temperature, so if you put it down on a hot day, so let's say it's 85, 90 degrees outside, and you're fertilizing your lawn, most of that's just going to vaporize off. It's just going to turn into a gas and be gone. Loves water, and it will attach itself to water and run off and go someplace else, groundwater, farm fields, wherever. It's mobile in the soil, so it moves in the soil. So when you put it down, it doesn't stay put. It's going to go usually deeper, so it goes deeper. It needs a soil pH of around 8.5 to 5.5 for that plant to pick it up. But importantly, it needs temperature. Temperature is really critical. And anything below 65, and the plant, so it's plant, you know, the world revolves around the plants and this fertilizer. Plants aren't going to be able to take it up if it's 65 degrees or lower. So if it's colder out, you know, if you add it, if you put, and I've watched people put fertilizer down in April, it's too cold. The plant can't take that up, and it's not going to bank it. So it's not going to be there a month and a half, 2 months from now. It's most likely either going to volatilize off, or it's going to connect itself to the next snowstorm and run off. And so the timing of when you fertilize, especially your lawn, is really important. And if you do it when it's too early in the spring, you're wasting your time and money. If you try to do it in the middle of the summer, you're forcing that plant to do something it really can't do. It wants to be dormant. Bluegrass, which is what the bulk of our lawns are, wants to go dormant in the summer. So temperature, nitrogen, for that plant to take up nitrogen, temperature is what controls it. Okay. Okay, covered that. Okay, so nitrogen is going to be taken up first over other nutrients. And again, soil pH has a real big effect on it. Your nitrate nitrogen. Is there a perfect temperature for nitrogen? Anything above 65 and anything below 85. Right in there. It's a pretty big window when you think about it here in Wyoming. If plants are stressed, so if you have some stressed plants, and so what is stress? What is stress to a plant? Hot, dry, windy, and not enough water. Not enough water. The water is a huge stressor for plants. If that lawn or that tree isn't getting enough water, it is stressed. And in trying to fertilize a stress problem, a stressed plant just makes that plant more stressed. Okay. So nitrogen again likes water. It will bond to water. Likes it. Gets consumed by other organisms, fish, plants, other aquatic plants, and a lot of research about the nitrates and groundwater. That's not a good thing. There's some areas here in Wyoming where you do not need to use nitrogen. You can just use the water out of your faucet. Okay, phosphorus. It's a little botany here. It's an essential ingredient of all cell protoplasm. Important in fruit, flowers, and root growth. This is a flower gardener's and a vegetable gardener's best friend, because this is what tells a plant to put down deep, strong roots. It tells a plant to put on flowers, to put on fruit. It, however, does need nitrogen to work best. So it's got to have a nitrogen nudge little nitrogen push. pH of soil 6 to 5 is its best pH range. This moves in plants. So it moves from old leaves to new leaves. So the bottom leaves are the old leaves and the new leaves are on top. And so the old leaves will release it to go to the new leaves. Soil moisture and temperature dependent again. So this needs to have moisture in the soil, needs to have a moist soil. And again, it needs to be warm out, 65 to 85, right in that temperature range. And again, it needs, because of that nitrogen nudge, it needs that. It doesn't move in the soil. It is the couch potato of soil nutrients. It just sits there until something pushes it, like the wind. However, it will increase the soil pH over time. So you've got to be very careful with how and when you add this and not to over add. So too much of a good thing, it can cause your fruit or vegetables to be bitter. Vegetables are going to remove anywhere from 10 to 15 pounds of phosphorus per year. You can kind of break that down from acre to your vegetable garden. And as long as the wind doesn't push it out or blow it away to the neighbor's yard, or it gets rototilled excessively, the excess phosphorus from last year will still be there for the next year's crop. Compost, vermicompost are your best sources, best all natural sources. Vermicompost is worms, worm composting. That was quite the fashion fad for a while here with the master gardeners, and a lot of people had vermicompost bins and were doing the worm thing. And phosphorus has no substitute. There's nothing else like phosphorus for what it does. It is not a renewable resource, and the vast majority of the world's mineable phosphorus is in Morocco. Okay, potassium. Sometimes it's called potash. I've heard people call it potash. The first time I heard it called potash, I was like, I looked at them and says, "Are you from Louisiana?" And they like looked at me like, "No." But it's called potash. I think I like it pronounced better as potash. And it was a term coined by early American settlers who produced potassium carbonate by evaporating water filtered through wood ash. That should give you an idea of the pH, and it is probably salty. So it's been watered through, if it's been filtered through wood ash, it's going to have a high pH to it. Ash-like crystalline residue remained in the large iron pots was called potash. Used in making soap originally, and it is the first registered US patent. That's kind of cool. So, what does it do for plants? Increases root growth, improves drought resistance, helps retard crop diseases, reduces water loss and wilting, increases protein content of plants. It's kind of important, increasing the protein content, aids in photosynthesis, regulates production of high energy plant growth compounds, it activates more than 60 enzymes in plant systems. And it's, again, you don't need a lot. And when you look at the numbers, so I'm going to stop sharing here. I get tired of looking at the screen just like you guys do. If you look at the numbers on a bag or box of fertilizer, the last number is your potassium, right? NPK. This is going to be on the test, by the way. And it's always going to be in a small number. It should always be a small number. Now you run across some fertilizers that are going to be like 10, 10, 10, 20, 20, 20. I try to avoid those, maybe for your lawn, but it's kind of it's too much potassium. It's way too much potassium. It's very salty. And so you got to be very careful with that, and it's going to push that pH. So be very careful with those fertilizers that are 10, 10, 10, 20, 20, 20, and they're out there. You want to find one, I like them where it's 5, 10, 5. Make your own fertilizer. We talked about that in the first class. And you can tweak your formula. You can put fish emulsion in there, or if you know you've got a specific plant nutrient deficiency, you can amend it and add more stuff in there. But you just want to kind of be careful with the fertilizers, and just understand that you've got to read the label, got to read the ingredient list to make sure you're getting micronutrients as well as macronutrients. So you want to make sure you get all of it, and you don't want more of one that you need, and you don't ever need that much potassium in a fertilizer. So we're going to take a break. Let's take about a 10-minute break and get up, stretch, pet the cat, get a cup of tea. My coworker is snoozing now in the chair. So let's take a quick break. It's good to see you guys. I would much rather be in the classroom doing this in person, but this year is just different. Yep. Okay.